Gavin likely endured unimaginable suffering in the weeks, if not months, leading to his death.
Please don't give these inhumane people a second chance at living a normal life. That is the first thing Gavin deserved.
A Utah woman beat, starved, and neglected a 12-year-old boy, eventually leaving his body so incapable of handling the abuse that he died. And his father not only knew about it, but allowed it to happen, and sometimes even actively participated. Shane Peterson entered a guilty plea to charges that were so horrific the judge teared up during his sentencing. We're going to take a closer look at the short and brutal life of Gavin Peterson, as well as the accusations that the state of Utah did nothing to protect him. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. On July 9th, 2024, 12-year-old Gavin Peterson was found unresponsive in the bathroom of his father's home in West Haven, Utah. As paramedics and Weber County Sheriff's deputies responded to the home, they started to note some horrific details. Gavin's rail-thin body was found on a wet bathroom floor, and he was wearing a saturated diaper. Paramedics say he was cold to the touch. Gavin was rushed to a hospital where he died. According to medical personnel, the boy was so malnourished to the point that his organs just shut down. An investigation started immediately into Gavin's father, Shane, and his stepmother, Nicole Scott, and also his older brother, Tyler, who was 21 years old. According to arrest affidavits for the three, someone had called 911 to say that Gavin had been vomiting and having seizures without medical intervention for multiple days. But stories about how Gavin ended up in the bathroom differed. Scott told police she found Gavin in his room covered in vomit but awake. She reported that she led him to the shower, left the bathroom, but then heard a loud thump and found him on the floor of the tub unresponsive. Gavin's brother told authorities that the little boy was already unconscious when he was found in the bedroom. And bedroom, by the way, would be a really generous word to use because investigators discovered the room, which could be locked from the outside. It consisted of just a plywood floor, no bedding or pillows for the 12-year-old. The boy was also monitored by multiple cameras, and screenshots accompanied horrific messages that Peterson's father, stepmother, and brother sent to each other. Arrest documents for Scott state the only images or videos of Gavin were of him locked in the cell, lying in a dirty diaper, covered in feces and wounds. The only text messages regarding Gavin were of how much they hated him, how terrible he was, and the torture they enjoyed putting him through. There were also conversations that discussed hitting and beating Gavin with a piñata stick, not feeding him, only giving him 1/3 of a cup of water or a piece of bread with mustard. Shane Peterson, Nicole Scott, Tyler Peterson, they were charged with multiple felonies, including child abuse homicide, aggravated child abuse, child endangerment. Scott was also charged with possession of a controlled substance when drugs were found in the home, while Nicole and Tyler faced additional obstruction of justice charges. Tyler Peterson pleaded guilty with a mental illness now being evaluated for potential treatment. And during Scott's plea hearing, the judge laid out just a laundry list of egregious charges.
Your Honor, the state filed an amended information adding one count of aggravated child abuse, a second-degree felony. Also, and this is the really important part, the child abuse homicide was amended to murder, a first degree, with mandatory minimum of 15 years to life at the Utah State Prison. So, Ms. Scott will be pleading guilty to count 1, murder, 3 counts of aggravated child abuse, all second-degree felonies, 1 count of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, also second-degree felonies, child endangerment, a third-degree felony, and then possession of a controlled substance, a Class A misdemeanor. Also, there is an agreement that there's a stipulation that all of these counts will run consecutively.
Ms. Scott, you heard Mr. Marshall's explanation of what the change of plea would be to.
Yes, Your Honor.
And is that your understanding of the negotiation?
Yes, Your Honor.
You're a little emotional today, and I'm not finding fault with that at all, but I need to make sure that you're thinking clearly today. Are you thinking clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and are you under the influence of any medication or any other substances that would make it difficult for you to make a weighty decision like this today?
No, ma'am.
In Gavin's obituary, family members wrote, Gavin was a bright spark and was destined to be a huge personality, even though his time on earth was cut tragically short. Although we will miss him, he will forever remain in our hearts. So to give us some more insight into the complicated background of this case, I want to bring on friend of the show, haven't seen him in a minute, KUTV 2 News anchor and reporter Brian Schnee, who has been closely following this case since the beginning. Brian, so good to see you. Gavin's story was in the news kind of not long after the whole Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand abuse case, fascinated people around the globe. This case didn't get as much attention, but it is an important one to really talk about and shed some light on. I mean, talk to us about this custody situation. How did Shane get custody of Gavin?
Well, it's a disturbing case. It's a shame it didn't get more play because it involved a child death and it involved prolonged abuse over the course of years, and it involved DCFS involvement since what we learned was 2013. It's 2025 now, and the DCF involvement goes really, really deep. They've had numerous instances of where they wanted to know more about what was going on in the Peterson home. Shane is dad, and then stepmother is Nicole Scott, who actually has a sentencing hearing today on this Monday. I was just skimming through the state's sentencing memorandum and guidelines, and the case is disturbing on the surface. It's worse when you learn more about it, as most of them are. But it is just, when you think you know everything about what this little boy endured, then you read something else, you learn something else, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And I can't possibly imagine what it was like to live his life.
How did Shane get custody of him, though?
I actually don't know how Shane got custody. I know that there was always child support involvement.
Yeah.
Mom's been in the picture. We've talked to mom before. Yeah. It's not clear to at least me how Shane got custody and how he kept. I think the most important thing is how did he keep custody over the course of the last 4 years? Because DCFS got involvement again with this family back in 2019. It was written that Gavin wasn't actually the reason for this call, but it was again in February of 2020 that they got another call about Gavin. So why was he allowed to be Gavin's father for the last 4 years leading up to his death when there was DCFS involvement? I don't know. But when you look at the DCF reports, they did these in-home sort of evaluations and processes. And apparently, from what it sounds like, from what DCF wrote on this case, DCFS rather, is that they met those requirements. But when officers arrived that day and located Gavin, who was deceased to what they thought, and then first responders were able to get a faint pulse of a heartbeat, which then they rushed him to the hospital, they noticed some things that were very odd, other than the room itself being like a jail cell with no carpet, with tape in the area, with surveillance cameras. They noticed that the door lock was supposed to be two-way after a DCS involvement and an order back in 2020. It was not. The family scrambled to put the original lock back on, but officers were able to put two and two together. This kid wasn't able to leave his room. And that was something DCFS ruled on back in 2020. How Shane Peterson was allowed to keep his kid, I have no idea. It's a great question. I just don't know. And
it's a question we ask in so many of these, cases. Sure. And it's unfortunate that we ask that question. By the way, my understanding is Gavin had an older sister, Melanie, who has come out, said she experienced very similar abuse in Shane's home. What do we know about her? How do we know she was able to escape this?
She spoke to one of our reporters too early on in this, because as soon as we learned about this, we started digging into that DCFS involvement. She, along with another child, actually had abuse allegations as well. I mean, called it horrific, called it the whole gamut, right? She became, I believe, an adult and was allowed to actually leave that home. So kind of passed through those years of abuse, which was not the case in Gavin's situation. I mean, he died, he was 12 years old, but these patterns of abuse were at least 4, maybe 5 years that we believe. And then, of course, being pulled out of school after people noticed things were wrong. There were a lot of warning signs here, Jesse, as there are in a lot of these cases. This one resulted in Gavin dying, though, whereas some of the other cases you and I have spoken about, kids have been able to break free. They've been able to get the help they needed, a la what happened in the Hildebrand situation down in Ivins, Utah. this is extremely egregious because it involved in a death, and it's something that we haven't given the coverage to nationally that this case deserves. We will see changes from this, and it's a shame that it took this to make these changes.
And so much of it was documented, right? Especially from Nicole Scott.
Yeah, let's talk about documents here on this case. I mean, look at all, this is 18 pages that the state has as their sentencing memorandum on Nicole Scott alone. Shane already, was sentenced recently to those 5 charges, which, as you know, Jesse, here in Utah, it's the sentencing recommendation, the minimum to the max. The judge goes, I want maximum. I don't want you left out. And, I want to turn that key and never see you out. But ultimately, it's up to the Board of Pardons and Parole here to determine the sentencing length after that time has gone on. But if you look through the 18 pages on Nicole Scott, I mean, some of the things that stood out to me were the fact that I just learned this reading on this today. This document came out in the early morning hours before her sentencing hearing, that we learned about the locking mechanism being switched when officers were there. They were ordered to actually have it switched. We also learned that she was on the phone with Shane after believing Gavin was not breathing and deciding to call 911. She spoke to Shane that day for 11 minutes and 17 seconds before calling 911. Law enforcement arrived 3 minutes after that 911 call and found Gavin unresponsive and cold to the touch. So in these 18 pages that were just kind of tossed out to the court today to decide what are we doing in terms of sentencing the stepmom here, we learned so much more about Nicole Scott's involvement. The text messages that were deleted but not fully put into the deleted, the recently deleted folder. So officers and investigators were able to find the screenshots from the surveillance cameras, just horrifying stuff. The family joking about Gavin having to eat his own feces. It's all in these text messages. The evidence was there. This is all happening relatively quickly as far as the judicial system and the court system is concerned, and it's because they know everything about what happened to this kid.
It's horrifying. It's horrifying. It's disgusting. And it's interesting you mentioned sentencing, because according to recorded jail phone calls that were between his plea hearing and sentencing, Peterson was heard saying, quote, he managed to push out 1 tear for the judge. You think this guy has any remorse at all?
No. And it's something that Judge Camille Nider mentioned. I mean, the judge here in this case handles a lot of terrible situations. She was emotional during the sentencing, Jesse. She said to the, paraphrasing, she said, hey, I don't know why we will call you his father, because you clearly haven't earned that right. And the fact that the judge was more emotional, she mentioned this, not me. The judge even saying, why am I more emotional than you are? It's clear that you don't care about what happened here. There was no emotion. It was stoic. And the actual reading from Shane Peterson with his maybe 4-liner that he read to the court that day was, I'm sorry I didn't do enough to stop him. It's not, I'm sorry I did this, and I'm sorry I did this and killed my son. Just sorry I didn't do enough to stop this. Kind of trying to point the finger to the stepmother here. But as we understand it, everybody was in cahoots. Even one of the other children, who's now, I believe, an adult, who also just pled out on mental related charges to the murder charge that was also included here too. This was a family involvement, Jesse, in terrorizing this child until his death.
So I want to circle back before we wrap things up on this. The timeline of DCFS is critical in this case. Can you shed a little bit more light on that for people who don't know?
Well, DCFS knew of Gavin since 2013. That is a long time ago. That was very early on in his life. 12 years old. It's 2025 now. He'd be, maybe 13 years old? A lot of these serious things that involved the Peterson family came to light really in 2020, when there was a call made to DCFS with concerns specifically about Gavin. Now, in that instance, the DCFS folks came into the home. They found Gavin was a victim of abuse. The caregivers in this situation failed to protect him from any abuse. On May 27th, 2020, the juvenile court ordered both households to participate in some of the DCFS in-home services. Now, what we learned there is that the family actually completed their mandated in-home services in May of 2021. So that's about a year's time. Referenced in the police report and referenced in the sentencing memorandum was the fact that the family needed to change the lock on Gavin's door so he could leave the room whenever he wanted. That was a mandate from DCFS during that time frame when they said everything's complete. Officers found that door to be one-way entry, and it was only from the outside in. It doesn't stop there, though. September 2nd, 2022, DCFS also received another report about Gavin's well-being and behavior, but apparently things didn't line up, so DCFS didn't legally open another investigation. March 28th, 2023, DCFS has another report about the Peterson family, alleging that physical neglect of Gavin. They opened another investigation. They got a second call a few days later, also alleging the family about neglect towards Gavin. Gavin was actually interviewed at this point, but was not forthcoming about any of the abuse. Probably a scared kid. What do I do if I say this? Do I trust everything that these people are talking to me about? Ultimately, that case didn't shed any light. So it's not just the first instance back in 2020. It's 3 or 4 instances before his death where DCFS was involved, opening investigation after investigation. Despite all of that, Gavin still stayed in the household. Regardless of all of these DCFS investigations, open and closed, this kid was fed maybe a third of a cup of water a day and maybe a piece of bread. Those were exchanged in the text messages. Do we feed him today or not? I mean, this is really horrifying stuff. That's right under the nose of the state's Division of Child and Family Services. And you can point the finger at anyone you want here, but at the end of the day, Gavin Peterson died, and they knew about Gavin Peterson. People knew about the abuse that Gavin was enduring, and nothing was done on the broader scale. When you look at it from the sky down to where Gavin was sleeping without a carpet, nothing was done to keep Gavin from dying.
It's pretty disgusting and pretty sick and very distressing, to say the least. And hopefully you're reporting on this. Hopefully this episode on it can not only bring light to it, but maybe get some answers and maybe put a little bit more pressure, because I think it's one of those cases where it's definitely necessary. I mean, I don't know how you're able to maintain your composure on a case like this. For me, it's a little bit tougher. But listen, Brian Schnee, excellent reporting as always on this. I'm so happy that you did a deep dive into it, because you know he needed answers for this. He deserves an.
Let me leave you with this one thing, Jesse. In the sentencing memorandum today, quote, "The pets in the home were given more care than Gavin was afforded." Let's just leave it at that. It shows to just how egregious, and I have a dog and I have a young child, it just shows to just how egregious this entire situation was. And I hope it sheds some light, and I hope we see improvements in our society from this case.
I do too. Brian Schnee, thank you so much. Great seeing you. And by the way, real quick, let everybody know where they can follow you for not only reporting on this story, but your reporting in general.
Well, I'd lend a lot of the credit to my colleagues here at 2 News who've done a lot of reporting on this, especially in the advocacy and accountability angle of DCFS and leadership as it pertains to this case. You can find it all on KUTV.com.
Brian Schnee, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
And now I want to talk about what Brian was mentioning, Shane Peterson's sentencing hearing on May 6th, where we heard an emotional statement from Gavin's sister and fellow abuse victim, Melanie, as well as from the judge and Peterson himself. So Melanie didn't want to speak in person, instead wrote a letter, which she read aloud for the court by somebody else.
Dear Judge Snyder, my name is Melanie Peterson. I am writing in regards to Shane Jesse Peterson's sentencing in the death of Gavin Peterson, my brother. My life has been completely upside down and forever changed since July 9th, 2024. My little brother meant so much to me, so learning about what happened to him really took a toll on me emotionally. I wake up every single day with anger and sadness that Gavin can't be at home with his real family. The damage this horrific crime has inflicted on my closest family members and myself is 100% irreparable. Gavin had one of those souls that was one of a kind, and he deserved the life that was taken away from him and so much more. Shane fully allowed Nicole to physically, emotionally, and mentally abuse his children, and absolutely no point did he show any sign of discomfort with what was happening or any desire to stop it. My entire life, all I wanted was a father who loved and protected me and my siblings the way I thought Shane would. Instead, we were left with an emotionally unavailable man who cared more about protecting his own image than he did being a dad. I didn't want to be recognized. I don't ever want to be recognized or known as his daughter. I find it disgusting and insulting beyond any amount of words. Please don't give these inhumane people a second chance at living a normal life. That is the first thing Gavin deserved.
Now, before delivering her sentence, Judge Camille Nider gave Peterson a chance to speak.
Yes, Your Honor. To my kids, especially my daughter, I would like to express how deeply sorry I am for my role in the abuse and the trauma that they all went through in my home. I've had several opportunities to interfere and protect you, but I chose not to do so. I am truly sorry, and I hope that one day you can forgive me. To my ex-wife, I am so sorry for how Gavin was treated in my home. I allowed this abuse to happen, and I did nothing to stop it. This abuse no doubtly was the cause of his demise, but also robbed you of the opportunity to know and love our son. I am so sorry from the bottom of my heart, and I hope that someday you can forgive me.
And when it came time for the judge to pass her sentence, she at times struggled to keep her emotions in check.
The investigation revealed significant concerning indicators of what he was enduring at home. He was always hungry and scavenging food. Due to repeated attempts to have his safety evaluated by DCFS, his caregivers ultimately removed him from school entirely, further worsening his isolation. He endured not being allowed to wear clothes other than diapers, being force-fed and possibly volitionally, meaning he then started to eat it on his own, feces, being subject to extreme discipline, confinement, and forced tasks such as cleaning in ways that would have been considered outside the norm. In the days leading up to his preventable death, his father reported he was vomiting and had at least one seizure. No medical care was sought. It's likely that the symptoms described were the early signs of the bacterial infection that would soon kill him. This was an essentially normal child who was driven to a point of psychological breaking. He would have been cognizant of what was happening, understood that it was wrong, and that the adults in his life who he should have been able to rely on for all things were, in fact, his tormentors. As a judge, we are to sentence based on the facts. But nobody sits here devoid of emotion, empathy, human experience, or just common sense. You don't have to be a parent. You don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to be any of those things to think, oh, maybe this should be wrong. The reason I emphasize that, and it does make me emotional, because I think of, first of all, you were Gavin's dad. I don't think you deserve that title anymore, but there's nothing that can be done to change it. You certainly were not his father, and you certainly were not his protector. I don't believe for a minute that you weren't part and parcel of a significant portion of the abuse that he endured. I also find it telling that I'm more emotional about this than you are. And I think that there is reason for that. I don't think there are enough adjectives and adverbs to adequately describe how awful this situation is. And the fact that I'm teary about it is the first time in 25 years that I can think of that I have ever gotten teary in court, other than something I was here for of a personal nature. I agree that you should be given the maximum sentence. I am going to run it consecutive. I also am going to encourage the board to keep you until you die. That is up to them, but there is no, if you're able to do this to your own child and allow it to be done to your own child, I cannot fathom that you can be rehabilitated. And it doesn't, again, make a difference that you don't have a criminal history. The consequences are that you did this to your daughter, you did similar things to your daughter, or allowed similar things to happen to your daughter. But even in Gavin's circumstances, I don't think there's any price that you can pay, any penance that you can offer up that the board will recognize as penance significant enough to make it safe to let you out. There's a lot of cases where I want somebody to have a glimmer of hope, that maybe if they go down to the prison and try, that maybe they'll get paroled. To be brutally honest, Mr. Peterson, I don't care if you have that glimmer of hope. I'm not going to send that glimmer your direction. The Board of Pardons might, but I do think you're entitled to the maximum sentence of this case.
You don't usually see that from a judge. And as we've discussed before in the Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrand case in Utah criminal court, a defendant is sentenced to a range of time in prison, not a definitive time. And then the Pardon and Parole Board, they decide when that person's going to actually be released. So Peterson is going to spend at least 8 years in prison, but could potentially be held there for the rest of his life. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.